السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله علي الذات عظيم الصفات سمي السمات كبير الشأن جليل القدر رفيع الذكر مطاع الأمر جلي البرهان فخيم الاسم غزير العلم وسيع الحلم كثير الغفران جميل الثناء جزيل العطاء مجيب الدعاء عميم الإحسان سريع الحساب شديد العقاب أليم العذاب عزيز السلطان. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له في الخلق والأمر. ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله المبعوث إلى الأسود والأحمر المنعوت بشرح الصدر ورفع الذكر. وصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه الذين هم خلاصة العرب العرباء وخير الخلائق بعد الأنبياء. أما بعد، فيا أيها الناس وحدوا الله، فإن التوحيد رأس الطاعات، واتقوا الله فإن التقوى ملاك الحسنات، وعليكم بالسنة فإن السنة تهدي إلى الإطاعة، ومن أطاع الله ورسوله فقد رشد واهتدى. وإياكم والبدعة فإن البدعة تهدي إلى المعصية، ومن يعص الله ورسوله فقد أضل وغوى. وعليكم بالإحسان فإن الله يحب المحسنين، وادعوه فإنه مجيب الداعين، واستغفروه يمددكم بأموال وبنين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. ومن يرغب عن ملة إبراهيم إلا من سفه نفسه ولقد اصطفيناه في الدنيا وإنه في الآخرة لمن الصالحين إذ قال له ربه أسلم قال أسلمت لرب العالمين. صدق الله العظيم. We're in the month of Dhul Hijjah, and we just concluded the days of Eid al-Adha. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from our Hujjaj. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala return them home safely, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala invite us to His home in next year, inshallah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Adha comes from the word dhaha yudahi, which means to sacrifice. The word sacrifice, the definition in the English language, is to give up something of value for the sake of something greater, for the sake of something more important. So for example, your child is sick and you decide to take off work to take him to the doctor or tend to his needs. That work time that you're missing out on, it has a monetary value. But your son is far more important than that value would ever be. So you're sacrificing that for that. Right? You have a deadline that's due within the next couple of days, or you have an exam. Sleep is important, but within those couple of days, to make sure that you're successful in your submission or successful in your exam, you might be willing to sacrifice that sleep in order to ensure that you do good. That's what sacrifice means, that you give something up for the sake of something more important. When we talk about sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order for a person to be willing to sacrifice things in this dunya for the sake of Allah, the love that a person has for Allah in his heart has to far outweigh anything else. And if a person finds themselves struggling to sacrifice things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the bitter reality is that that thing has overtaken their heart to a point where it's competing with their love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. When we speak about sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to speak about the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. His legacy was a legacy of complete and total submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a legacy of sacrificing no matter the cost for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a legacy of unwavering trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked Ibrahim to give up for his sake, he gave it up. Whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Ibrahim alayhi salam do, he said done. It was that simple. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala night and day to grant him a righteous offspring, to grant him a child. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously grants Ibrahim alayhi salam a child at an age where typically people don't have children. Right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants Ibrahim alayhi salam and his wife Hajar salamun alayha this child, Ismail alayhi salam. You can imagine how much joy he brought them. And shortly after, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Ibrahim alayhi salam, take your family and go to this place, this barren land, which the Quran describes as biwadin ghayri dhi zar'in, a place in which no vegetation grows, a place with no water, no resources. And if there's no water, there's no food, there's no resources, that means there's no people. Because you have to have these resources in order to live. So basically go to the middle of nowhere with your family. Ibrahim alayhi salam, again, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said do, he said done. They get there, and shortly after, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Ibrahim alayhi salam that leave your family here, and you have another job to do in Sham, leave your family and go. Now when we tell stories of the Prophets alayhim salam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, oftentimes we tell it like it's a scene from a movie, like it's fable, like it actually didn't happen. We rip out all the emotion, right? And we tell it like, yeah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Ibrahim alayhi salam, leave your family in the middle of nowhere. He listened to the command of Allah and Allah saved them. But no, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Imagine driving to Tulsa, Oklahoma, driving to Baltimore, driving to California, driving state to state. It's Isha time, you have to stop to fill gas. And you stop at one of those gas stations. And when I say those gas stations, I mean the ones with the dim lights, that although there are no signs saying this, the visuals of the gas station just say, don't stop here. Not a good idea. When you stop to fill gas, you tell your wife, your child, lock the doors. But you're standing right there. Lock the doors. Okay? If you have to walk inside the gas station, those 30 steps that you're walking from the car to the gas station, you're looking back 17 times, right? Almost straining your neck in the process, just so there's not a split second when your eyes are not on your family. If you have to rush inside to get water or food or something, you're almost running from corner to corner to make sure there's not a split second when your eyes are not on your family, right? Imagine leaving your family there for 5 minutes. You just drive off and you come back in 5 minutes and pick them up. You can't imagine it. This is in a place where there are lights. This is in a place where there's people. This is in a place where there's water, where there's food, where there's resources. When you know you're coming back, when it's going to be a short period of time, Now put yourself in the shoes of Ibrahim alayhi salam. No people, no idea of if he will be coming back, when he will be coming back, no resources, no water, no idea of what might come their way in terms of wild beasts, nothing. And he's being commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leave your family here. He settles his family down, he gets on his animal, and he starts heading in the other direction. Hajar salamun alayha, she says, what's going on? Where are you going? No response. Because what is there to say in such a moment? She says, are you just going to leave us here and walk away? Again, no response. And then she asks a question. Out of all the questions she could have asked, she asked a beautiful question, right? She could have said, where are you going? Are you coming back? Will you bring back biryani? Like, there are a million questions that she could have asked. But this is the one question she asked. Allahu amaraka bihada. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala command you to do this? He nods, yes, alayhi salam. And her response, إِذَنْ لَن يُضَيِّعَنَ اللَّهُ أَبَدًا. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never allow us to perish, will never allow harm to come to us. You do what your Allah told you to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you to do, and don't even think about us for a split second. Because you could never take care of us the way Allah could take care of us. So go. The response, the faith. See, this is why we say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Because they too lived a life, a legacy of total, complete submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unwavering trust in Allah, willingness to sacrifice for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously took care of them, as we know through the well of Zamzam. I'm going to summarize and move forward for the sake of time. Later on, when Ismail alayhi salam reaches an age where he's old enough to move around with his father, as the Quran describes, فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَعْهُ السَّعْيَ, Ibrahim alayhi salam receives a dream. And his dream is something that fathers will find unfathomable to even think of. He sees in the dream that he's slaughtering his own son. And when you and I see dreams, sometimes they're meaningful, sometimes, most of the time, they're meaningless. But when prophets of Allah alayhi salam see dreams, those are commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's wahi, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being revealed to them. And Ibrahim alayhi salam understands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding him to do this. And so as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَلَمَّا بَلَغَ مَعْهُ السَّعْيَ قَالَ يَا بُنَيَّ إِنِّي أَرَى فِي الْمَنَامِ أَنِّي أَذْبَحُكَ فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى قال يا أبت افعل ما تؤمر ستجدني إن شاء الله من الصابرين. Ibrahim alayhi salam says to Ismail alayhi salam, he says, oh my son, I've seen a dream that I'm slaughtering you. Right? And Ismail alayhi salam understands that this means that this is something Allah commanded me to do. And if it's a command from Allah, then the response can't be maybe. The response can't be, we'll think about it. The response has to be done. But look at what he says to his son. He says, فَانظُرْ مَاذَا تَرَى. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think about this? What do you think we should do? Right? This is a command directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yet he's doing shura with his own son. Do qiyas on this with your own children. Is this something that we do? Or is it do what I say, otherwise you're going to get a slap on the head? Right? See a lot of smiles. And the response of Ismail alayhi salam, قال يا أبت افعل ما تؤمر ستجدني إن شاء الله من الصابرين. My father, do whatever Allah commanded you to do. Similar to the response of Hajar alayhi salam. Oh my father, do whatever you've been commanded to do. Just like you're going to be patient with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you'll find me inshallah to be patient with the command of Allah. A lot of fathers in the room thinking, what would my son say? Right? In a moment like this. But let's be honest with ourselves. Have we implemented the behavior that we want our kids to embody? I want my child to be in the front row of the masjid every single day for every single salah. Have I modeled that behavior for him? I want my child to be willing to sacrifice whatever is required for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Have I embodied and implemented and modeled that behavior for him? I want my son to be a son or a daughter who is in love with the Quran, who loves to read the Quran, loves to memorize the Quran. Have I modeled that behavior for them? Because the only way Ismail alayhi salam is able to give this response is because he saw his father and his mother again and again and again submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without a single second of doubt. Right? He saw his father leave his mother and him in the middle of nowhere and walk away despite the difficulty. He saw his mother's response, right? Go do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded you to do. لَن يُضَيِّعَنَ اللَّهُ أَبَدًا. And because he saw this behavior modeled again and again and again, he's willing to sacrifice whatever is necessary for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to ask ourselves this question: have we modeled for our children the behavior that we desire them to embody? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in our children, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be good role models for our children. Ameen. فلما أسلما وتله للجبين وناديناه أي يا إبراهيم قد صدقت الرؤيا إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إن هذا لهو البلاء المبين وفديناه بذبح عظيم. Whenever they completely submitted to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khalas, it was decided, we're going to do this. وَتَلَّهُ لِلْجَبِينِ, and he turned him to the side, getting ready to carry out the act. And narrations mention that Ibrahim alayhi salam had the tool and he actually carried out the motion, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't allow it to cut. And the lesson is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't necessarily need your sacrifice. He subhanahu wa ta'ala just needs to know that you're willing to let go of what your heart loves for His sake. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't have to take Ismail alayhi salam, but He needed to test if Ibrahim alayhi salam was willing to let go of the one thing that he loved, and to prove his loyalty and his love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, Ya Allah, whatever it is on the other side that I have to give up for your sake, Ya Allah, I'll always give it up. Even if it's the one thing I've been making dua for day in and day out and you miraculously granted me, Ya Allah, even that I'll part ways with it for you, Ya Allah. وَنَادَيْنَاهُ أَيَّا إِبْرَاهِيمُ, we called out, O Ibrahim, you have fulfilled the command of Allah, you have fulfilled what you've seen in the dream. This is how we reward the people of ihsan, the people of excellence. That we don't necessarily need to take your sacrifice. إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ الْبَلَاءُ الْمُبِينُ, this is indeed one of the most severe tests. This is a clear test that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Ibrahim alayhi salam. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ, and we granted him an animal to sacrifice. And on Eid al-Adha, unfortunately in our day and age, most of us, we just send our money online and that's our udhiyah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us. But we don't necessarily get to experience the physical motions, the majority of us at least, and have this reflection. For those of us who do udhiyah, right, this is the reflection that you should have. For those of us who don't, we should make an attempt to do it here in our country. There are farms available that we can do that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from us all. But the reflection is, yes, you're sacrificing an animal. Yes, that's what we do, a ritual that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us. But what you're doing, what you should be reflecting on is that, Ya Allah, whatever desires, whatever things I've fallen in love with my heart, Ya Allah, this is me giving it up for you, Ya Allah. I will always put you first. Just like the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam, that, Ya Allah, for your sake, if I have to be thrown inside of a fire, Ya Allah, I'll be thrown inside of that fire. No problem, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, if the choice is to leave my family in the middle of the family to please you, Ya Allah, I choose you, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, if the choice is you or my son, Ya Allah, I choose you. And in our lives, every single person is going to have a different story, a different thing they struggle with, a different thing that their hearts have fallen in love with. Ya Allah, if I have to choose between you or my wealth, Ya Allah, I choose you. Ya Allah, if I have to choose between you or my desires, my temptations, Ya Allah, I choose you. Ya Allah, it doesn't matter what's on the other side of the equation, Ya Allah. Whatever you ask me to give up for your sake, Ya Allah, I will always choose you, Ya Allah. That's the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam that we should learn from, that we should strive to follow, that we should try our best to embody in our own character. Just like we saw the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam leaving his family in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't even imagine leaving our family somewhere for 5 minutes. This is in the presence of cell phone, food, water, resources, others, right? But he did whatever was necessary to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that doesn't mean that it's not difficult. That doesn't mean that the sacrifices you will make will not be difficult, right? But it means that if you do your best to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always take care of you. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved Ibrahim alayhi salam from the fire. Just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took care of the family of Ibrahim alayhi salam when they were in the middle of nowhere, where there was nothing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them everything. Look at Mecca today. The answers of the du'as of Ibrahim alayhi salam, because of the sacrifices he was willing to make for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the du'a that he made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibrahim alayhi salam, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever you submit to His will and are willing to sacrifice for His sake, He doesn't necessarily have to take that sacrifice from you. Just like with Ismail alayhi salam. There are many people in this room who have stories where they were forced to part ways with their wealth only to see it come back to them 5 minutes later in a way that they could have never imagined. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't necessarily need to take from you, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what He wants to do is to test. Has your heart fallen in love with anything else beside me? When I give you gifts such as wealth, such as children, such as progeny, such as whatever it is, community, are those things that you use for my pleasure, or are those things that distract you from me and take you away from me? That's the test. That's the lesson of sacrifice. And if we look at the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we will see this theme again and again and again, sacrificing for the sake of Allah. If we look at the example of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, this is the theme we will see again and again and again, sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because sacrifice is the true test of love and loyalty. As we mentioned in the beginning, in order to sacrifice, the love you have for the thing you're sacrificing for has to far outweigh the love you have for the thing you're sacrificing. So when you sacrifice, it's a testimony of your faith. It's a testimony of your love. It's a testimony of your loyalty for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to learn from the legacy of Ibrahim alayhi salam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow our hearts to be hearts that love Him and only Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our hearts from ever loving anything more than they love Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower His rahmah upon our ummah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with our brothers and sisters in Palestine. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with our brothers and sisters all across the world, regardless of where they are, regardless of the struggles they are going through. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower them with His mercy, shower us with His mercy, and put barakah in our lives. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيد الرسل وعلى خاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله الأزكياء وأصحابه الأتقياء. يقول الله في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا واصرف عنا شر ما قضيت. إنك تقضي بالحق ولا يقضى عليك ولا يعز من عاديت ولا يذل من واليت. تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. لك الحمد على ما قضيت ولك الشكر على ما أنعمت به وأوليت. نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. أقم الصلاة.
Few announcements, inshallah, while the rows are being formed. First of all, I want to remind you that on July 4th, we will have our Eid Carnival, inshallah, from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. There will be rides, food trucks, all the usual carnival stuff. Also, there is going to be a program this coming Friday, June 20th, our quarterly family night, but this is a special night. We are welcoming back our Hujjaj, inshallah, that night. Also that night we will provide a very important construction and financial update. It is very important that you all attend that event. We will have 3 very good food trucks outside that night, and we will be offering free Kona ice to our youth and children on that night. So please come with your families, inshallah. In addition to that, there is a fall Umrah trip that Sheikh Salah is taking. If you haven't signed up yet, please sign up for that trip. If you have signed up and haven't paid the deposit yet, please do so as soon as possible so that your place can be kept. Sheikh Salah has started a Islam 101 class that's already in progress. Those new Muslims that want to join the class, you can send an email or contact the office. We have few dua requests here from the community. Dua Shifa for Sister Kanis Fatma. She has cancer. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant her complete shifa. May Allah have mercy on her. May Allah make it easy for her. And whatever treatment she is getting, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that treatment beneficial for her and heal her completely. We have two dua maghfirah requests. One for Brother Javed Malik. I don't have a lot of details, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him highest place in Jannah and forgive all his shortcomings. We have also a dua maghfirah request for our community member's mother-in-law, Brother Ali Sheikh, our Frisco community member. His mother-in-law passed away in Pakistan, Sister Sarah's mother. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also accept her in Jannah, make her transition easy from here to the Akhirah, inshallah. And I think that's about it. Jazakallah khair.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله. Straighten the rows, fill in the gaps, stow. Allahu Akbar. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله العظيم الذي لا إله إلا هو. استغفر الله العظيم الذي لا إله إلا هو. استغفر الله العظيم الذي لا إله إلا هو. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام.